You've been sensing it, haven't you? A subtle yet undeniable shift. It didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in like a quiet unthreading. Not an event, not a crisis, but a slow, deliberate dissolving of the reality you used to call home. At first, it looked like ordinary exhaustion. You blamed it on your schedule, your responsibilities, the constant demands of a world that only applauds your productivity. But deep down, you knew this was something else, a different kind of tiredness. The kind that comes when you are holding up structures that were never built to sustain the truth of who you are. This isn't ordinary fatigue. It's your soul's refusal to keep generating energy for a version of you that no longer exists. You wake up in the morning and feel it in your chest, a heaviness that doesn't belong to any particular problem. It's the weight of all the false identities you've worn for so long, finally losing their grip. And in the quiet moments between obligations, you can almost hear it, the echo of an old self fading into the background, a self that knew how to play the part, to hold the mask, to keep the performance seamless. But something in you has decided the performance is over. You don't remember the exact moment the shift began. It didn't announce itself. It didn't ask permission. It just arrived, patient and persistent, like the tide eroding a shoreline that was never meant to last. And now, as you stand here in this subtle unraveling, you are realizing something you've always known but never dared to admit. You don't resonate with who you were pretending to be. Not anymore. You've outgrown the stories that once defined you, the roles you inherited to feel safe, the patterns you repeated to be accepted, the commitments you made when you didn't yet know how to trust yourself. None of it fits. And you can feel the friction of it every time you try to pretend you still care. Every time you force yourself to participate in an identity that doesn't feel real. This is why you feel disconnected, not because you are broken, but because your nervous system is finally choosing integrity over performance. And that is the most honest thing you've ever done. You are not lost. You are in the space between definitions, between what you used to believe you were and the truth you're just beginning to remember. It feels empty here, doesn't it? But this emptiness isn't a problem. It's the clearing where your actual life is about to emerge. Stay here with me. Breathe. There is nothing to fix, nothing to rush, nothing to force. This is the moment you've been unknowingly preparing for your entire life. You're learning that the end of pretending is not a dramatic collapse. It's a slow, quiet withdrawal from everything that never felt real in the first place. And while part of you aches to go back, to reclaim the certainty, the rhythm, the belonging, the deeper part of you knows that returning is no longer an option. Because the old life you're tempted to reconstruct was never built to hold your full presence. It was built to keep you small enough to be acceptable, predictable, manageable. And you didn't even realize how much of yourself you had to amputate to keep fitting inside that container. That's why the exhaustion feels so heavy now. You've spent years generating energy to sustain identities that never felt natural. Years negotiating your aliveness so you wouldn't disrupt the expectations around you. Years saying yes when every cell in your body was screaming no. And it worked. For a time, it worked. It kept you safe. It kept you praised. It kept you moving through the world in a way that didn't invite questions. But at what cost? The cost was your own resonance. The cost was the quiet knowing that you were living someone else's life. The cost was the relentless fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. And now here you are, standing in the pause between stories. You haven't yet learned how to feel comfortable in this space. No one taught you that emptiness could be holy. No one told you that letting go could feel like failure, even when it's the most honest thing you'll ever do. So your mind searches for something to hold on to, a plan, a narrative, a checklist. Anything that will make this transition feel more like progress and less like disintegration. But this is not the kind of change you can manage with strategy. This is a change that requires surrender, a change that demands you stop performing clarity and start practicing trust. Because you don't need to know where you're going to honor where you are. And where you are is between worlds. Between the person who needed validation to feel worthy and the person who is ready to let worthiness be her natural state. Between the life that required constant proving and the life that feels effortless because it's built on what's true. between the version of you who needed to be needed and the version who simply chooses to be. Breathe. You are not failing. You are arriving. And even if it doesn't feel like it yet, this moment, this hollow, sacred, uncomfortable moment, is the most important one of your life. It's where the old illusions lose their power. It's where the false self starts to fall away. It's where the real you finally begins to surface. Stay here. Don't rush to rebuild. Don't rush to label what is dissolving. Just stay. Because what comes next will not recognize the version of you that was only ever trying to survive. It will only recognize the one who stayed. You might be tempted to call this a breakdown, but look closer. This isn't collapse. This is clarity breaking through the structures you built around your heart. Structures that kept you functioning, but never allowed you to fully feel. Structures that taught you to measure your value by your output, your usefulness, your ability to stay composed in a world addicted to urgency. And when you finally stop upholding all of it, something astonishing happens. The silence you were most afraid of becomes the doorway to a peace you didn't know you were allowed to have. This is why you feel so tired. Because you are no longer outsourcing your safety to performance. Because you are no longer willing to barter your truth for approval. Because you are no longer sustaining the old energetic contracts that required you to betray yourself. It's not just your habits that are dissolving. It's the entire vibrational grid that held your old life together. And yes, your mind wants to call this loss. But your body knows better. Your body knows this is freedom. It doesn't feel glamorous. It doesn't look impressive. No one gives you a certificate for choosing to let go of everything you outgrew. There is no audience clapping as you sit alone in the quiet, breathing into the space that used to be filled with noise. But you are here anyway. And you are more honest in this rawness than you ever were in the performance. Let yourself grieve the version of you that believed she had to keep proving she was worthy of love. Grieve the routines that once gave you structure, even if they also kept you small. Grieve the dreams you inherited that were never really yours. And when the tears come, because they will, remember that they aren't evidence you're falling apart. They are evidence you are finally safe enough to feel everything you had to numb to keep functioning. This is the work no one sees. This is the healing no one applauds. But it is the most sacred reclamation you will ever experience. You are not here to perform a new identity. You are here to let everything untrue burn itself out of your field, so that what remains is not a version of you refined for acceptance, but the real you, unapologetic and whole. You don't need to rush this process. You don't need to package it in language that makes sense to anyone else. You don't need to measure your progress by how much you can produce while everything dissolves. You only need to stay. Stay in the quiet. Stay in the in-between. Stay with your own heartbeat, because the life that is coming will not require you to sacrifice your aliveness for belonging. It will meet you exactly as you are. There will be mornings when you wake up and feel like nothing is left. The rituals that used to ground you will feel hollow. The ambitions that once propelled you will feel foreign. The people who once felt like home will feel impossibly far away. On those mornings, you will wonder if you've made a mistake. If you've dismantled too much, let go of too many roles, burned too many bridges back to who you used to be. But you haven't, because there was never a true version of you waiting in those places you abandoned. Only the familiar echo of who you had to become to survive. And that's the hardest truth of all, that the life you thought you were grieving was never actually yours. It was a performance of safety, a choreography of belonging, a sequence of gestures and words and sacrifices that kept you accepted but never truly seen. Now you are learning to live without the performance, without the old scripts, without the costumes that made you feel invulnerable. And it feels disorienting because your nervous system was wired to interpret stillness as danger. It was trained to believe that if you were not performing, you would be abandoned. That if you were not producing, you were failing. That if you were not proving, you were irrelevant. So of course the emptiness feels unbearable. Of course the slowness feels like you are disappearing. But you are not disappearing. You are returning. Returning to a self that doesn't need to contort to be worthy. Returning to a body that doesn't need to carry the weight of everyone else's expectations. returning to a spirit that doesn't have to dim itself to be digestible. And in this return, you are encountering the purest form of power, the kind that doesn't shout or demand validation, the kind that hums quietly beneath everything, unshakable and serene. This power was never lost. It was only buried under layers of survival. And now, as the old layers peel away, you are meeting it again, not as an idea, but as a living, breathing presence in your own chest. And you will know you are close when you feel both terrified and profoundly relieved. When you realize you don't have to keep chasing anything to feel real. You don't have to keep explaining yourself to feel understood. You don't have to keep earning rest, earning peace, earning love. You just have to keep choosing to stay. Stay in the space where nothing is familiar. Everything is honest. Stay in the moment when the impulse to rebuild collides with the invitation to surrender. Stay in the knowing that this is not the end. It's the prelude to a life that will not require you to abandon yourself. There will be days when you feel like you're floating in a void so vast you can't remember what it was like to be tethered to anything. You will search your mind for something to hold on to, a plan, a label, an old certainty, and nothing will come. This is the phase where the ego panics, where every story you've ever told yourself about who you are dissolves into static, where every identity that once gave you security feels like an ill-fitting costume you can no longer bear to wear. And this is precisely where most people turn back. They rush to fill the emptiness with distraction, with busyness, with any familiar story that promises relief. But if you can resist the temptation to fill the void, if you can let yourself linger in the hollow space, something miraculous will happen. You will feel the first flicker of a presence that doesn't come from any external source, a signal that doesn't depend on validation or recognition. It will feel quieter than your thoughts, softer than your emotions, but more real than anything you've ever performed. This is your original frequency, the essence of you that existed before you learned to edit yourself to be acceptable, before you learned to apologize for your own intuition, before you agreed to the invisible contracts that said you must trade your aliveness for belonging. In this frequency, you remember. You were never meant to fit perfectly into any system that demanded you sever parts of yourself to stay included. You were never meant to sustain relationships that required you to silence your truth. You were never meant to carry a life that felt like a performance instead of a home. This remembering doesn't arrive as a revelation you can explain to others. It arrives as a hum in your bones, a stillness in your belly, a spaciousness in your heart that says, this is who you've always been. And you'll know you are integrating it when you stop apologizing for your sensitivity, when you stop bargaining with your intuition, when you stop trying to prove your worth by sacrificing your peace. This is not the kind of awakening that makes headlines. It won't look impressive from the outside, but it will feel like coming home to a self you thought you'd lost forever. And it will feel like a quiet revolution inside your chest, one that doesn't need an audience, because the real you never did. And now that you've arrived here, in this silent clearing where the old structures no longer bind you, you might feel a strange combination of grief and wonder. Grief for the years you spent living as an echo of other people's expectations. For the time you invested in roles that kept you invisible to yourself. For the energy you poured into sustaining illusions that were never yours to begin with. And wonder. Because beneath all of that performance, there was something in you that never stopped pulsing with truth. Something that refused to be extinguished, no matter how many masks you wore. Something that kept whispering, this isn't the whole story. And now that whisper has become a steady, undeniable frequency. One that doesn't shout for attention. One that doesn't demand you fix or force anything. One that simply asks, can you trust that who you are without the performance is enough? That question is the doorway. The invitation to stop reattaching yourself to expired versions of reality just because the emptiness feels uncomfortable. To stop explaining your transformation to people who are committed to misunderstanding it. To stop measuring your evolution by how well you can keep up with a world addicted to urgency. Instead, to learn the sacred skill of staying. Staying present with your own unfolding. Staying soft while the old frequencies shatter. Staying receptive to the intelligence that only speaks in stillness. Because this is the gift hidden inside the dissolution. When you no longer define yourself by your performance, you become available to a life that feels alive, a life that meets you with reciprocity instead of extraction, a life that doesn't ask you to diminish your knowing to fit in, a life that expands to match the frequency of your honesty. If you are here, reading this, feeling the ache and the relief of finally being seen, you are already in the portal, and there is nothing you need to do to prove you belong. This is your permission to stop performing clarity, to stop searching for certainty, to stop grasping for the old identity just because the new one hasn't fully revealed itself. You don't need to rebuild yet. You don't need to hurry this rebirth. You only need to hold the field, to trust the unfolding, to stay true to the resonance that has been calling you home all along. Because what's rising in you now is not another performance. It is the real. It is the original. It is you.